appreciation for your background.
Good morning, everyone. Steve introduced me already. Billy Flynn. I spent 23 years in the Canadian Air Force, before then flying Eurofighter Typhoon as a test pilot, and now for many years F-16s and F-35s for Lockheed Martin. I'm a fifth generation F-35 test pilot. I fly all three variants of this airplane in the Tuxant River, Maryland, which is near Washington, D.C. I've been on the program for many years, and I'm here to join Steve in explaining to everyone the difference of what fourth generation legacy airplanes are versus what a fifth generation multi-role aircraft like the F-35 does.
So Billy and I today are going to brief you on both the capabilities of the F-35 as well as give you some background on the programmatics of how we're doing. So my background, my name is Steve Over, and I'm the leader of our F-35 International Business Development Team. I'm an engineer by background. You'll probably kind of detect that as we go through our discussion today. And so with that, let's get started. So Billy, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
So most of what we know, my experience, I flew in combat. I led the Canadians in combat over Kosovo in 1999. Most of what we know in our history in recent times is asymmetric warfare. It's insurgent efforts in combat, not the good guys against the bad guys, big wars of my history in the Cold War. That's not our future. We know that our future will evolve from environments like this to this. Big nation states against formidable surface-to-air threats and large numbers of fourth generation fighters with pretty impressive capability and large force employment, much like we knew in the Cold War where I grew up as a fighter pilot. We're here to talk about fifth generation, and this has a unique part of the evolution of fighter aircraft, but it's worth bringing you to how we get here. So my father was an F-86 fighter pilot in Germany back in the late 1950s. The first of generations of MiGs and American fighters. And then we went supersonic with airplanes like the F-104. At some point in the Vietnam era, we introduced airplanes that could do multi-roles, 2 roles at once, and we started firing sophisticated weapons like missiles. And then we got into the fourth generation, super maneuverability or highly maneuverable, truly multi-role airplanes. The most iconic of the multi-role fighters is the F-16. I have 2,000 hours flying F-16s. It is an airplane that on any day can do many different missions. The F-18 and F-15 here are somewhat like that. In the meantime, stealth technology is not completely new. The SR-71 was built by Lockheed in the 1960s. It's a spy plane that you now see in museums in the United States. Stealth evolved, and early, if you remember Gulf War I, we learned about the F-117 stealth fighter. Invisible, not very maneuverable, very capable stealth airplane in the stealth bomber, the B-1, again not very maneuverable. That got us into now fifth generation. Fifth generation is a product of $50 billion US of investment and research money from corporations like my company, but also by the United States government in evolving what an aircraft could do. And we built an airplane that is as maneuverable or more maneuverable than the fourth generation fighters, but is stealthy, invisible, which I'll talk about in detail, as the airplanes down here. So highly maneuverable, necessarily impossible to see. It has stealth and a level of sophistication that I'll explain to you next. And then it has a massive shift in sensors or in information that's presented to the pilot. An F-16 or an F-18 at some point overwhelms the pilot because the video game is too complicated for him. That was never, ever going to change for the pilot, no matter how good they were at video games. Sensor fusion, first on the F-22, then different or evolved on the F-35, took the difficulty of managing the sensors away from the pilot and made it simple and elegant for him to manage extraordinary amounts of information. 2.2 million lines of software code that power this airplane, flown only by the United States Air Force. 8.6 million lines of code powering an F-35. Next, please. So we're going to build this airplane, as I talk about capability, to help you understand what it is. Stealth cannot be pasted or put on an airplane afterwards. You cannot take an airplane and turn it into stealthy. It has to be that from the beginning. To go long distances, you need extraordinary amounts of fuel, typically, usually carried in external fuel tanks underneath the wings of airplanes. In our case, it's embedded in the skin of the F-35. Our sensors, like our radar, are all inside the airplane, inside the skin of the airplane. Our engine, think about walking up a lot aircraft, an Airbus or a Boeing airplane or Lufthansa, and seeing the front face of the engine as you climb up the stairs in the front. All of that reflects energy, which means I could see it. In our case, we hide our engine behind our duct there for the intakes of the air into it. We hide every seam, every panel, every single bolt, nut, and fastener on an F-35 is hidden everywhere on this cockpit, or on this airplane. Every panel that has to be accessed has special seams and fasteners that make it completely flush and return absolutely no radar energy from it. Our sensors are antennas that would typically stick at the top or a bottom of a Boeing airplane, are flush inside the skin of the airplane. And finally, we hide our weapons inside weapons bays. You'll see it in the simulator later. The bombs and missiles of many varieties and combinations are hidden inside the belly, if you will, let me say in English, inside underneath me in a weapons bay on both sides of the airplane, the bombs and the missiles that we shoot. And the combination of all, in our case, the third recent stealth airplane that Lockheed has built, F-117 to F-22 to F-35, helped us understand what it takes to build a completely stealthy airplane. So what does that mean? I have two children, a 21-year-old and a 12-year-old. I have read every Harry Potter book, and I've seen every Harry Potter movie. It is like, I say this often, it's like Harry Potter and the Cloak of Invisibility. It is completely wrong to say that this aircraft is invisible. That is not accurate. It is accurate to say that it is so difficult to see, and it is so hard to detect, that we are able to come and go over top of adversaries without them ever knowing we were there. And we know that with the confidence from the F-22 Raptor and how it has flown for more than 10 years operationally. That's our confidence that of the world that we are entering. It's very, very difficult for an adversary, here shown these would be the cones of detection that they might be able to see us as we employ. If you measure us next to a fourth generation airplane, and this is something that looks kind of like the fourth generation legacy airplanes are out there, that legacy aircraft is that much easier to detect. But when you go into combat, you go long distances, which means you carry fuel tanks on the outside to give you the range to go those long distances. You carry weapons, bombs,